Welcome to Blue Sky. My name is Richard Tannery, and I started this program to celebrate innovators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. Hey, welcome Mark Holden to Blue Sky. Good to have you back, sir.
Man, it's good to be here. Episode 14. Here we are.
Number 14, man. Keeping it alive.
Yes. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, of course, man. And I've got this kind of new format through a new podcast platform. We'll see how that goes.
Outstanding. Looking forward to it.
I mean, it's the spirit of continuous improvement, man. You got to start somewhere, and then you just have to do small incremental improvements, try to make it better as you go. I'm a big proponent of learning on the fly, man.
100%.
Well, let's get to know Mark Holden. Let's do favorites rapid fire.
Oh, let's do it. All right. I'm ready.
Cool.
Ready.
All right. One word, one phrase to these. What was your first car?
Toyota Celica.
What's your go-to movie genre?
Ooh, lately it's been documentary unscripted.
Okay. What's your spirit animal?
I work with many spirit animals, but the octopus calls to me the spirit of the animal of adaptability.
If you were an airplane, what would you be?
Either an X-15 or SR-71 Blackbird, but I'm sure that last one wouldn't surprise a lot of folks.
You can only have one superhero power.
Invisibility.
Breakfast, lunch, or dinner?
Breakfast all day.
What's your go-to ninja weapon?
The katana.
Okay, which Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle was that? Was that Donatello?
No idea. I don't know my TMNTs as well as I did as a kid, but maybe my go-to TMNT would have been the ones with the size, so the little pointy things you can carry with your hands.
Ooh, I think that was Raphael.
Sure, there you go. I'll take it.
All right. Mark, what have you been up to, man? We've got Defense by Holden. We've got the Vanguard, and we can go over a lot of this later, but let's give a general overview. Who's Mark Holden?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be back. We've certainly had a lot of growth professionally since we last connected. I believe I was Blue Sky number 2. Here I am, number 14, a few months later. Over the past 9 months since starting my entrepreneurial journey, you've seen me kind of go from, just individual consultant, content creator to growth marketer to, some semblance of influencer now to standing up a community of like-minded defense and aerospace individuals looking to kind of grow and build capacity in this defense industrial base we've got in this highly decisive decade. But really, what I'm squarely focused on here in just about the cusp of Q2 is events. Not that I'm hosting events, but we're ultimately in May, we're going to be doing our first big booth here in SOF Week, Special Operations Forces Week in May, where I'll be doing a Holden Sends booth. One, to continue to connect with my audience, continue to connect with my customers. I really had the opportunity to double down on my content. I think last time we talked, I was just entering my video content journey where I was creating some content for brands, creating a little content by myself. And throughout that time, I was really measuring the measures of performance, measures of effectiveness, deciding if YouTube was really right for me. And, for the folks that have been following me, really what I found is, while I really enjoyed creating content and posting a lot of my video content on YouTube, it was unfortunately relatively highly ineffective. I very much realized that YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok continues to be platforms where people have dreams, but not a whole lot of jobs. And so I'm continuing to double down on LinkedIn. I'm using YouTube as a way just to host my video because ultimately LinkedIn doesn't have that. But since then, I've had the opportunity to work with some awesome brands as a result of that content. I'm working very closely with a lot of the brands that I just am irrationally excited about, and I adore their products, to support them through just, contract growth marketing efforts, a little bit of influencer marketing, and now really kind of hot on the heels of coming off of a really exciting Q1. I'm really looking forward to my next concept of trying to work a little bit deeper with brands. In Q1, you call it January, I went around to SHOT Show, which is the large like shooting and tactical sports show in Las Vegas in January every year, and had the awesome opportunity to establish an incredible number of just very close agreements with a lot of brands. And so depending on when this comes out, our audience will be seeing www.holdensends.com, where I have the opportunity to talk a little bit deeper about some of the products that I am irrationally excited about the products that I carry every day. Oftentimes people will see me, they'll flag me down at trade shows and they're like, they talk about me and kind of what I do, but then they always have questions like, hey man, what kind of knife should I get? What kind of flashlights do you use? Right. What kind of sleeping bag do you use when you go camping? And so, I took the opportunity and just established a ton of partnerships with those brands. And through www.holdensends.com, I'll have the opportunity to continue to protract my personal and professional brand, some of the products I use in a more e-commerce style fashion. And so what you'll start to see in the future is me start to talk a little bit deeper about the products. I'll give you an example. When F-15 weapon system officers deploy with an MPAT knife on their chest. And I loved the story of how that knife got developed. So I went over to Tops Knives based out of Idaho. I met the design team. I kind of learned about what the design considerations were about that knife. How do you create a knife for an air crew? And so throughout my content in the coming weeks and months, you'll start to see me tell stories like that. And again, provide the opportunity for the audience, if they choose to purchase that knife, to be able to do that through my e-commerce platform. I'm learning so much about e-commerce and some of the challenges of standing that up. And I'm really refining the logistical side of that so I don't get into another creator trap. But for me, very excited about that. Very excited for May for Soft Week. That's where we'll be officially launching Holden Sends. The Vanguard will also have our booth there as well. We'll be right up on the main floor. I literally won the lottery. There's normally a 10-year backlog for Soft Week or Soft Week booths, and had the opportunity to just put my name into a lottery in the back half of last year. I won it, and we've got a 10x10 booth right in the main drag, right in the main exhibit hall. And I'm so excited to be able to connect both with my audience at that time, and to be able to kind of work with some of the brands that I've been working with and kind of showcase their products at that booth. And then after that, I'm going to work on May to continue to develop my next round of content. I'm using April as a real big like creative cycle for me to be able to kind of program what does May and June look like for some of the content I want to create. Of course, if you've been following me, I'm going to bring it up to another level. I'm going to turn it up to 11. I'm going to crank that knob off. And I'm so excited for Q2 2024, Richard. Over.
Talk to me about the creator trap. It resonates with me, and I think I know what you mean, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So if you take 100% of all people on social media, just about 1% or less actually create content. They're out there, they're creating content on their respective platforms. Oftentimes, folks will take a look at their respective audience or their desired avatar, and they'll say, okay, they live on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, so let me go create a bunch of content and I'll cross post to there. And unfortunately, Facebook's very different, Instagram's very different, TikTok has very different expectations on content. And then my underlying thesis is that people on Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, they've got dreams, but no one's got money there. LinkedIn is where people have jobs. And so I focused initially on LinkedIn. I then started up a YouTube channel, grew it, monetized it, and ultimately realized that, 95% of my work was going into creating the content on YouTube. And I could attribute absolutely $0 to the actual work that I did on that. And so I doubled down on LinkedIn to try to get out of that creator trap. Now, I have avoided creator traps, and that creator trap is when you look at other forms of content. You look at things like, well, I can start a newsletter, and I can start a blog, and I can create content, and I can do a YouTube channel and do live streams and do all these things to connect with your audience. But you get 3 or 4 episodes in, you get 3 or 4 newsletters in, you get 3 or 4 blogs in, and you're like, this is not what I wanted to do. And people don't shut it off because they're worried about kind of disappointing their audience. And to be frank and very transparent, I created a podcast, the Holden Sends podcast. And I had a couple of guests on, I recorded a couple episodes. By the third episode, I realized that while I loved having the conversation, I did not want to like go through that process of editing and posting and promoting and then just like continuing to shout into a void to grow another line of my business or grow another line of effort, when I could just take that same effort, that same focus, and just put it back into the thing that was working, which is just my daily content on LinkedIn. So I identified my flywheels. The 80-20 rule still applies. I was very disciplined in what that trap was. And that creator trap is very easy to get ourselves into when we see other creators get into courses and communities and coaching and podcasts and all this stuff. And then you realize you're just half-assing a whole bunch of stuff when you should just be whole-assing one thing. And so for me, when I think about that creator trap, I think about the podcast that I never launched and the guests that I had on, and ultimately the audience that I spared from content and brand promotion whiplash by not establishing this over.
You have nailed 99% of my thoughts on that. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I've kind of reeled back on Blue Sky over the past month or so.
Yeah.
Intentionally so. I want to do it. And it was never started to be a monetization effort, nor do I think it ever will be. But at the beginning, I kind of had these aspirations that, this awesome podcast is going to take off, and I had a vision for it, and I knew it was pretty rough around the edges, pretty lo-fi, low production quality, but I had to start somewhere, and I had grandiose dreams for what it might be, but reality has since settled in, and it just kind of is what it is. And what I've realized about the program and myself is that it's more just a fun hobby, and that's where I want it to be. That's where it should be. And so I'm focusing now on re-gearing it, to my point earlier, improving it in small incremental measures. I want to keep it going. I've got 14 episodes now. I want to see what episode 100 looks like. And then we'll have a flashback episode and look at episode number 1 and do a side by side. And I think it's going to be hilarious, but it's all for the purpose of my own selfish hobby interests. Right. And, on that note, I've been a bit restrained on podcast content. It's been kind of boxed in to that professional circuit, so to speak. But on this episode, I want to take a little left at Albuquerque and try something a little new with you. Can I experiment with you for a minute?
Let's do it. I'm stoked. I'll get my helmet on. I'm about to get my mind blown. Let's do this.
Oh, this will be fun. It's another rapid fire, but this is in the spirit of the clown world that we currently live in. And I'll give you an example of where this came from. Pete Buttigieg, what is he, whatever you call it, something of transportation, the czar of transportation at the federal government level. He said the other day, there's this certain bridge that was built too low for a school bus to fit under. And he has now attributed that bridge to racism because it was intentionally built so that, quote, Black and Puerto Rican students in a school bus could not get to the beach. And when I start to hear politicians talk about infrastructure being racist, I have to acknowledge that we live in the upside down, and everything is just a complete wackadoodle journey. So in the spirit of this clown world that we live in, let's do a little clown world rapid fire. And picture. We'll start off with one word, one phrase response. Retirement of the A-10 Warthog.
Fighter Mafia.
CERN and the Mandela effect.
Not CERN's responsibility, but the Mandela effect. Mandela effect is absolutely accurate.
Global war on agriculture.
Yeah, very accurate, coming from PRC, primarily.
Impending 12,000-year solar cycle, the micronova.
100% less about micronova, more about the precession of our planets moving through the solar system along that Earth. We are at the tail end of that 12,000. We've hit it a couple times, and it's about to get real weird here in the next century or so.
Reusable rockets aiming for Mars.
It'll be good to go back to Mars.
Mainstream media is a corporatized, self-licking ice cream cone.
Unadulteratedly correct.
Thanks, man. I think I'll throw these into every guest cycle next time. We'll get some interesting topics going.
Yes, sir.
You know, if you mention some of these things, it's a conspiracy theory. If you dive into the details, you're now far right. If you don't believe any of it, you're a woke libtard. It makes no fucking sense, quite frankly. Where the hell are we, and where do we go from here? Because nothing makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about 12,000-year solar cycles. You talk about the Mandela effect. You talk about CERN and breaking space-time continuums and all that stuff. I think at this point, since we're in, as you would call, wackadoodle land, potentially, it's so important to recognize that it's up to the own individual to create their own reality. You can subscribe to your own individual notions. It's up to you to foment your own ideas and create and develop your own reality and develop what you think is the basis of truth. Too often we find ourselves at the mercy of the headlines we read. And you called it out. Like, the headlines are completely programmed. They are absolutely there as a deliberate persuasion effect into the groups that, as we said, right, social media, 1% of the people actually produce the content. The other 99% or more are the ones that are consuming that content. Same thing goes for like even more extrapolated, more exponential into news cycles. And like, I years ago stopped reading headlines, right? You ask me about anything that's going on in the world, you know, other than like, you know, some of the wars and conflict and, you know, the retirement of the A-10 Warthog and how the F-35 won't be able to fill that bill. Like, I'll be able to tell you that, but man, there's so much in this world that I am just numb to and have no idea about because I just stopped reading headlines. I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on TikTok, I'm not on Instagram. And so for me, like, the biggest thing is to recognize that, like, we are where we are. Yes, we're in a very weird time in humanity, but it is a personal strategic imperative for each individual to question the status quo, to rationalize what they believe is truth and what's not, and for them to indivisibly and individually develop the reality that they'd like to live.
What's your take on what's happening with the southern border?
Scary stuff, man, and well underreported. You know, there's a couple of things going on in this world that are scaring me, and it's like, sure, there's an influx of people, you know, in the southern border. There's a lot of folks that are military age males from China that are coming over. That's a challenge. I get really frightened less about like, you know, the marijuana and the cocaine coming over. Like, fentanyl is one of those things that is a strategic, deliberate attack on the people. You'll hear me talk a lot about TikTok and how TikTok is a deliberate attack to retard our youth. Fentanyl is a deliberate attack to take out our military age population. So when or if we have to establish a draft, not only do we not have enough functional populace, military age men, and individuals to be able to support that draft, but we also are losing capacity to be able to counter an uprising that could occur in the United States. You look at PRC, CCP doctrine, like, very much little 12-person organizations spread around the U.S. is the doctrine, is for when the switch goes on, the balloon goes up, that uprising will occur. It will not occur, you know, on our coasts. It will not just occur in our borders. It will occur in hometown USA, center mass of the United States. And every single day, man, we have hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of folks coming on over to the US. And it is woefully underreported. And for me, when I think about some of the challenges, I think about not just the people, but some of the other weapons like fentanyl that comes over from not just the southern border, but also the northern border as well, to do some of those deliberate attacks on our populace.
And you can see some of the seeds that have been planted legislatively. They're creating legislation to badge and arm undocumented non-citizens. Yep. They're creating international policy so that the UN, our very own NATO, can come and secure our own country if and when that becomes a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild. The writing's on the wall, and it's not subtle. But of course, it depends, to your point, on the 99% of consumers and what they believe of the 1% of content creators. And I think we need to really understand that mainstream media, that self-licking ice cream cone, they're content creators. They are not journalists. They are not on neutral ground in spelling out facts. They are legit, slanted, angled, corporatized. They're owned by large conglomerates, many of them owned by the same single or two companies out there. And it is purely just content. It is not news. It is not journalism.
Yeah. One of the better books, if an individual is looking and reading this and they're like, tell me more about this. One of the better books to read is a book called Trust Me, I'm Lying. And it goes in and the log line of this thing is like, brands will use headlines in the first couple sentences of articles as sensational pieces. But if you really read those sensational headlines and you go deeper into that article, like you'll realize that they'll say something outlandish and then they'll counter that and say this is completely unverified, like somewhere down the article. But no one reads that, man. People just read the headline. They just read the lead, the first sentence on there. They formulate their opinion. They go to cocktail parties and they just parrot that party line. And no one's questioning that status quo. No one's fact checking all this. And like the stock market, right, is like one of those things that is so easily manipulated by headlines. We're seeing with Boeing right now and kind of undulation of that. We saw it a lot with Microsoft, OpenAI, the advent of large language models and how that's changing up tech and how just a simple headline in a simple news article can just like go on wildfire. And it's so important to know that like so many of these articles cite Reddit as their source. So many of these large Wall Street Journal will say Reddit user, potato masher 42069 said that this, and this, and like that's their source. It's also important to recognize that ChatGPT and your large language models where you get all your information of was trained off of Reddit user data. That's why Sam Altman had a large stake in the Reddit IPO. And like, I would not consider Reddit a viable source for large, contextual scholar information, nor do I want to create my, view of reality based off of potato masher 42069's thoughts. And so again, question the status quo, fact check, just like you figure out where your meat's coming from, figure out where your information's coming from as well. It's so important to formulate your own opinions, or else you're just going to get sensationalized, radicalized, and divided. And we're seeing that so much right now. Like, you're calling from Texas, right? We saw some time ago with again the advent of continued border crisis, the nation and a state with a National Guard unit really just like questioning who owns who, what can we do legally. You kind of alluded to NATO being able to come in, and I think in the years to come we have the opportunity. As a human race, certainly as a nation, to continually divide that those nations and the states, and just bifurcate our views. And we're heading into election year, so it's always going to get weirder. With the advent of large language models, election meddling is completely scalable right now. And with AI getting so dang good, voices and images are so easily replicated that, again, you can't trust what's in front of you.
And great segue into China.
Yep.
We've got the TikTok thing. Mm-hmm. We've got the behind the scenes. We've got the election year meddling. Yep. We've got fentanyl, which comes from China. Where does China fit into this elusive masterpiece of bullshit?
So China 100 years ago published their war plan. They published exactly what they were going to do, when they were going to take the Taiwanese continent or the Taiwanese islands, how they were going to build up their military industrial complex. You saw things like a strict tightening on their youth. You saw now the advent of the youth bowls to kind of counter that. We're seeing a lot of opportunity for China to potentially be a paper tiger. Again, I will happily eat my words on any of this stuff. But it is getting scary. It is getting scalable. We have to also recognize that like we are in a potential 3-front war right now. We are not at war But as we look towards these next great conflicts in this decisive decade, before in the last election years, we have seen, Russia continually meddling in our elections. We have to assume that there's going to be a lot of that as well. The People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party are really there to sow discourse and a lot of confusion in the American people. And we're going to see that. You're seeing that already again. We've seen that for decades through TikTok. We're seeing a lot of ugly things in the Middle East right now with this new world order. When we see China, we think about hybrid warfare that will eventually lead to conventional warfare in the form of littoral combat in the South China Sea. We think about Russia, we think about unified land operations with a little bit of what we call Russian new generation warfare, which again is that kind of election meddling and things like that. But the stuff going on in the Middle East is very kinetic, and that stuff gets America really scared again, man. We growing up in the wake of 9/11, joining the military in the wake of 9/11, serving through GWAT. Like, I know what terrorism does to the people. It certainly unites us, but it does scare us. It is very terrorizing. And so when you mix the hybrid warfare aspect, when you mix new generation warfare with the undercurrent of terrorism, it's a state of the world that we've never seen before, and is a really ugly side of that. We also are continuing to uncover new ways that the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party continue to affect and sway Americans, again, through things like fentanyl, through things like TikTok, through things like artificial intelligence. But we see this through DJI drones. We see this through ByteDance and CapCut, the thing that most people use to edit their video. CapCut's an awesome video editing platform, but anything you upload to CapCut continually gets uploaded back into the Chinese Communist Party. We're also seeing a lot of things like, so right now it's job seekers, right? Job seekers are really trying to figure out, like, how do I get a job right now? Because it's not an easy job market. We're seeing a lot of folks from the People's Republic of China initiating job applications just to continue to get people's information, try to get people's cell phone numbers. We're seeing so many, like, anybody will pick up their phone and they'll say, well, I've had some random text messages from people that eventually try to get me to WhatsApp, and I'm not sure what that's all about. Like, no one knows what that's all about, but it's happening across all sorts of industries. And it's a scary time. And you got to question your reality. You got to question the status quo. And very quickly we can get ourselves into this echo chamber where we're talking at each other in this sensational cocktail hour of chaos, and we're just echoing off each other. And very quickly we can believe lies, and very quickly we can be swayed when we don't realize that the information that's being presented to us is the very information that's there to derail us as a society.
And an ongoing subtext is what Jonathan Haidt was on Joe Rogan the other day, talking about ever since 2015 and the mass advent of the smartphone, there is a pandemic of neurological disorder in childhood development. And with the rollout of smartphones, you have a generation of children who, beginning in puberty, when your frontal cortex actually begins rewiring and preparing you for adulthood, it's now been disrupted by this technology that is reframing consciousness and how thought processes are formulated. And so combine that with everything you just talked about. Combine that with not just the fentanyl epidemic within our fighting age military people, but also veteran services, the recruiting and retention crisis, the 22 a day crisis. We have major issues in being able to actually tangibly recruit and retain a fighting force to protect the United States of America against all these enemies, foreign and domestic. And so if we just take the kind of the non-cynical, the optimist side, and we assume that our leaders have really good intentions, and we assume they're trying to reconcile these things and create effective NDAA or military budgets for the DoD. Let's assume that they are actually doing audits and accounting for that money, and they can track it, and they don't lose $1 trillion in an airplane going to Ukraine. Let's assume all things being equal, everything is great. Where does that leave us in terms of the budget, DoD innovation, and the effectiveness thereof of that leadership to get us to a point of defensibility?
Yeah, we are trending in a very scary direction, Richard. We really are. Our budget is growing, and as a an individual run professional services firm in the defense and aerospace realm, it's like that's kind of exciting for me. But seeing where we're programming those dollars are just it's been highly ineffective. Gosh, so long ago we were warned about the rise of the military industrial complex and how that individual military industrial complex will gain an utmost amount of power to self-lick its own ice cream cone. And, I think about things like F-30, talk about F-35. We think about A-10 Warthog being a highly effective piece of machinery and how F-35 is just not the thing that, like, politically driven because the Pratt and Whitney engine plants in this town, and this senator got this thing budgeted. And not to sound unpatriotic, but like coming into tax season, we're like, if I hope I don't get audited. I've been audited in the past. We can't even audit our own budget, and we will not account for half of the dollars that are pushing out there yet. We're looking to the American people to subsidize that, lack of funding or that lack of accountability in the budget. Additionally, as we start to think about things like sensational programs like Replicator and hype like that, we have a really big challenge where we kind of have to develop and kind of have to acquire higher orders of technology to maintain technological superiority and overmatch on the battlefield. But we're doing a lot of challenges and almost pushing ourselves backwards because the rapid technological obsolescence we see in higher orders of technology. This is like the procurement of drones that every 6 months, battery technology gets better, camera technology gets better, propulsion technology gets better. Like we can't buy into a 40-year program. We can't buy into a 4-year program without rationalizing the fact that in some time and in the future and in due time, those products will be highly irrelevant. We're going to have to go through that budgetary cycle again. And because of the amount of bureaucracy it takes to get a hardcore program of record funded, because of the pressure that in the very scarily thin margins it puts upon the defense and aerospace industrial base that, due to higher forms of patriotism, choose to use their dollars to fund some of America's tougher problems, like they're getting put in a very tough spot. And again, like if you want a new idea, read an old book. We had to develop 324,000 and change aircraft to support World War II. And if you think about all the B-29s and P-51s and B-24s and B-17s, there's like out of the tens of thousands of each of those aircraft that we developed, there is 2 flying B-29s still left. There's like 1 B-24. There's like 1 B-17 that's still flying because we choose to restore them and spend $10,000 an hour to keep those things flying. But the attrition of our products overseas will be incredible. And when we decide to take, instead of develop 10 little carriers, we develop 1 super carrier, 1 hypersonic missile takes that thing out. It puts the entire region at risk. We're not able to effectively rationalize the scalability of our forces because we're blinded by technological innovation. And we're still kind of focusing on this big technological hurdle that we need to maintain overmatch. Like I think we're having a hard time just maintaining match in this. So I know a lot of our old planes are going to get dusted off because we're going to lose just a ton of our technology going forward. It's a bit unfair that we as a taxpayer don't have the ability to question a lot of these budgets that are coming through. And while I'm excited to see some of the programmatic funding that's occurring in some parts of us, like we're still seeing the drawdown of foreign internal defense forces and special operations. We're seeing more and more focus on bigger technology and higher orders of technology and less focus on scalable and available mass. We think very much about that overmatch, that high order of technology that we can push against the enemy, when we should be focusing on not just affordable mass, but available mass. We talk a lot about it with the our industrial base, not just our defense industrial base, but the industrial base that will have to be reconverted to retool and support this potential 3-front war we've got going on in the future, this big, great war we've got. And when I think about, the budget and the lack of the ability to account towards it, the lack of the ability for the Americans to really weigh in on where they think that budget should go. It puts a lot of not just the American people, not just the war fighters, not just the civilians that will be operating in the future battle spaces, but it puts the entire defense industrial base in a really precarious situation. And I'm interested to see how that plays out. Over.
You mentioned replicator. I've heard that thrown around, but I'm not very familiar with that. What is it?
Yeah, so Replicator is a program announced by Kathleen Hicks. It's a DoD initiative that is aimed at countering the People's Republic of China's mass through the rapid deployment of uncrewed, unmanned systems. And the whole point is focusing on autonomy to scale our force. The program's core strategy is leveraging small, uncrewed systems and a bunch of different variety of platforms, numerous disparate platforms to innovate in areas where China potentially has numerical advantage. This is like ships, this is missiles, this is personnel. And this whole innovation, this whole initiative draws inspiration from the effectiveness of the Ukraine conflict right now, the effectiveness of cheap unmanned systems or uncrewed systems in the conflict of the Ukraine right now, where we can leverage autonomous systems to conduct naval attacks, to conduct reconnaissance, search, target acquisition, battle damage assessment, reconnaissance, electronics, and straight up direct action attack. Now, DIU, or the Defense Innovation Unit, and Kathleen Hicks, very focused on what I believe, as you said, as good intention. They are very well intentioned in this. There's a lot of collaboration with industry that we're seeing that's kind of hyping up the industry. It happened really fast. And Replicator's kind of whole funding and the whole implementation details have just been so muddy. It's been tough for industry to hit that moving target. Industry, which has conditioned its business development practices, its autonomy, its monetary practices for these long-standing 18-month, lead times on developing a program, were essentially met with a ton of whiplash that says you will be ready next week or you will not be ready at all. And a lot of people, I know a lot of good companies, did not have the opportunity to pitch in for Replicator to be able to scale some of these operational gaps. And so we recognize a big deficit in the U.S. military's capability and available force to be able to counter the large numbers that we're seeing coming out of the People's Republic of China and the military that supports that. And, it's really while the focus is creating capabilities that will effectively counter those type of adversaries, there are certainly no shortages of, potential flaws in that particular.
And is anything actually going to come out of it? Or is it this just sort of a, I don't want to say dog and pony, but is it the bureaucracy getting in its own way and creating this huge illusion of progress where on the output of that illusion, there's actually substantially nothing, or maybe one contract that comes out with one specific piece of gear or kitting or something like that? Like what will this actually produce?
Yeah, I think it's producing a lot of excitement and hype. It's also producing a lot of false hope. It's so sensational to put an uncrewed, an unmanned system, a drone in the face of a soldier, sailor, airman, marine, Space Force guardian, and tell them to go fight their wars with this robot. Now, I want to be abundantly clear. My desired end state is a bunch of robots fighting robots, right? That's what I want. I'm from the day I enlisted in the military, for every company that I worked for and every company that I support now, I'm unified by one single mission. And that is the reduction of organic tissue damage on the battlefield. So a bunch of humans don't have to fight humans anymore, man. I don't want to do that. I've been in the military. I've been to war a bunch of times. Like, I don't want to see that anymore. And I want to use robots as a way to do that. So on paper, I'm on board with this, but logistically, I don't know if like a mass amount of drones are the way to do that. Ultimately, when you provide a bunch of cross-domain autonomous systems that are from 12, 24, 48 different companies, you have 48 different systems you've got to learn. You got 48 different platforms you got to learn. You got a whole bunch of things you have to train. You lose things like coalition force interoperability. You lose things like joint force interoperability, where the Marine Corps and the Navy are using different things and the Army's using different things and everybody's using different things and none of it works together. It briefs really well, but ultimately, anytime that you use an uncrewed or an unmanned system, there's a massive logistical tail. If you use a drone to go take out a target, you got to train an operator. You got to have that operator launch and recover that thing. And the recovery of that system is what drives so much of the cost. The logistics and sustainability of uncrewed systems on the battlefield is not what it is for, a conventional smart weapon, right? When I think about smart weapons these days, I think about GPS guided and laser guided munitions. And let's be real, in this day and age, those are not smart. They are just obedient. And ultimately, when we think about robotics as a way to scale the force, yeah, there's a bit of versatility. Maybe there's a little bit of adaptability into the conflict. We're seeing a little bit of that. But ultimately, we're hemmed by things like ethical and regulatory considerations when using autonomous systems or drones to enter into the kill chain to make decisions. There's an incredible amount of question on the precision and the effectiveness of those systems themselves. And you are putting the operator at risk, but ultimately, you are rife with technological challenges. Like we said before, you put so much money into this drone, and 6 months later, a year later, the cameras are better, the sensors are better, the autonomy is better, the batteries are better, and there's no means to procure that advancement. Back in the early days when we were creating a product called the REDD Skyraider with Ariane Defense, that then became FLIR, that then became Teledyne. A big focus was on all right, we need to be able to change the motors out. So when we create heavier lift props, they can change it out. We need to be able to change the batteries out on the fly. We need to be able to change the payloads out on the fly. And that was a big cornerstone of that success. But not everybody's focused on that. Not everybody can, because not everybody can pay Skyraider money for Skyraiders these days. The big focus is on low cost, cheap, attritable, and they want Ferraris on Toyota Celica budgets, man. They won't get that. And so I look towards the future trends. I look towards the advancements in artificial intelligence, the miniaturization, size, weight, power, and cost in this technology. And I look forward to the opportunity to further enhance robotics. But ultimately, I can't stop but hesitate and realize that if we just took replicator dollars and put it into better munitions that are coming off the rails of collaborative aircraft, of aircraft that are focused more on autonomy, of higher orders of technology, or systems that, again, can increase the precision, is such a big focus, because the more and more our humanity ages and progresses and comes together, the less and less tolerant we are about civilian casualties and collateral damage on the battlefield. And the more smaller your munitions, the more precise your munitions can be. The less collateral damage you have, the more effectiveness I would bin that as. And so I think technologically we're trending in the right direction. But again, we can't just immediately say hey, it worked out in Ukraine. Let's focus on Ukraine's using the drones that they won't allow our military to use, which for good reasons, right? NDA Section 848, go read it up if you care about that stuff. But ultimately, man, when I think about Replicator, I know it's in well-intentioned. I just worry about in 9 months from now, I don't know if we're going to find a highly effective end result as a result of that. Again, primarily because of technological obsolescence, logistical considerations, ethical concerns about having autonomous systems in the kill chain, and some of the future trends that I potentially will see on the battlefield. Over.
Kind of the crux of being the world's leader in defense is that we actually think about things like the ethics behind what it is we're creating. You can look to Ukraine and them being nimble enough at this guerrilla grassroots rebellious movement by putting cell phones around a city so that they can triangulate in on incoming aircraft, and by buying off-the-shelf drones and putting mortar shells on them and just dropping them willy-nilly on their combatant, and littering fields with mines. I saw some new invention the other day where they're touting how this awesome autonomous or remote controlled tracked vehicle can sit there and just dump mines without risking the operator in planting those mines. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing technology in an amazingly unethical sort of space. I get that we have to defend things, but can we do it with a different thought process? And of course, that's because we're here in America, and we actually have, I'd say, a different perspective on the development of these things and other impacts other than just kill the enemy. But is there is there an imbalance? Are we on the far end of the spectrum where that consideration actually impedes our progress versus the other end of the spectrum where they can take off the shelf doohickeys and make them into weapons? Where's the balance, and how do we get back to a place of defensibility?
I don't know if we can get to a place of defensibility. Ultimately, what we consider is this concept of what's called a pacing threat. And it's like, yes, like we are the technological like leader in all things warfare most of the time, right? When we create a new weapon system that's more stealthy and faster and harder to detect and harder to counter, the second and third order effects of that on the battlefield are the enemies trying to develop the next technology to counter that. We are the pacing threat. Said differently, if you've ever run like you're in track, you got a mile, you got 4 laps around the track in your high school or whatever, your college. Ultimately, like if your goal is to be number one, like you just need to be the faster than everybody else on that track. But if you've got a stud on that track that's just running 4.5-minute miles, like you got to run a 4:28 mile to get there. But in the end, like you're still first. It doesn't matter how fast you ran it, you're still first, right? We as America are the ones that are establishing that pacing threat every time we create a next level order of technology, a new countermeasure, a new defensive technology. The ripple effect to our enemy is just to try to pace that, create the next level of technology, and it forces us as a defense industrial base to like have to innovate to achieve this concept of overmatch, to achieve this concept of match on the battlefield. And again, it's this like it is not as self-licking ice cream cone as our information systems are, but it is this whole concept where it's just like if we were still fighting with sticks and stones, like someone would be breaking out a bow and arrow right now. And we will always find those asymmetric threats on the battlefield. We'll try to grow that. And so we are pacing, we are the pacing threat on the battlefield right now. We are causing our adversaries to invest a lot of money to try to counter and then develop the next generation of things that could potentially meet and destroy that potential technology on the battlefield. And that is just how we've been since we established this military industrial complex a lot of years ago.
Thus enters one of your entrepreneurial pathways.
Oh, yes.
And let's see if we can show this.
Yes.
I won't go any further than this. I just wanted the interface. But can you tell me the origin of Vanguard and how this conversation we're having now feeds into that?
Yeah, so I loved going to trade shows, talking to some of the big defense industrial base leaders. I loved having those conversations in a lot of these symposiums. I loved having the discussion of where our country and our defense industrial base needs to be in the sanctity of a very controlled room. But outside of those particular meetings, we saw a couple things. We saw information being siloed. We saw information additionally being published on like LinkedIn as just like the medium for us to have those conversations. And on the back half of last year, gosh, we started to notice not just a ton of spam getting unregulated and LinkedIn being a relatively ineffective platform to just converse in, but holy crap, we started to see a lot of our adversaries starting to piggyback and siphon a lot of that information, much like they do with a lot of the social media apps. They started doing it very quickly to our defense industrial base. So a couple of us got together and we started to think like, what do we need to do? Not today, but what do we need to establish now? So in this decisive decade, when the balloon goes up, when there's a call to action for this industry, like we do have a safe space for our defense industrial base leaders and innovators to converse, to grow, to build capacity in our defense industrial base. And we've done that through the Vanguard. And ultimately, like Vanguard is the medium, not the message. Yes, you're looking at an online forum right now, but it is so much more than that. We have great conversations through our live streams every week. We have the opportunity to converse in person. Usually the big trade shows once a quarter, we'll throw everybody together, try to get together and have these discussions. And it's become an opportunity to, again, have a secure medium for us to converse as a defense industrial base for innovators and leaders and folks who are looking to break into the industry. That's kind of the unintended byproduct that has surprised me over Vanguard. We've been around. Here we are on our 12th week, 3 months into this community we've built here. And what we found is we've had a lot of folks come in, and while they haven't been a member of the defense industrial base like we expected, they are people who are just unadulterately excited about supporting that mission. And they've come in we've had Vanguard's been able to use some of the information that they've been able to gain, some of the networking that they've been able to gain to achieve funding for their ideas. We've had Vanguards come in, leverage some of the network to be able to break into that defense industrial base. And it's been so transformative, not just for myself and as a community kind of manager, but also as the individuals within the Vanguard to have a secure medium to have those discussions. Because there's so much that I just can't, won't say on LinkedIn. And a lot of people will see my LinkedIn content. Mark, you're not supposed to say some of that stuff. Let me rest assured, if I post it on LinkedIn, it's been unclassified since the 90s. That's a lot of that stuff. If I talk about the shell companies that the intelligence community used to get titanium out of the USSR to fund the SR-71 Blackbird program, we that stuff was published in the 80s and 90s. We started talking about that stuff a long time ago. If I start talking about radar cross sections and stealth technologies, they're to have a discussion. But every time someone comes into my comment section for a post like that and says, you shouldn't be posting this on LinkedIn, it's this is exactly why we have the Vanguard, to have a secure space, to have a medium. It's for individuals to be able to connect one-to-one, to have a group session where we can all have a safe space. Because there's just a lot. Stuff on this podcast. I'm not going to talk about Mandela effect on LinkedIn, but I love the Mandela effect. Let's get into Berenstein versus Berenstain Bears. Let's talk about Fruit of the Loom. Let's talk about all this stuff. But no, I'm not going to talk about that in my professional network. You got to have an outlet. And what's really the big surprising thing for me was not just the growth we've seen in the last 3 months, but the retention we've seen in the last 3 months for the Vanguards that have popped in. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. The ability to kind of bolster our defense industrial base and ultimately build capacity is something that I'm very passionate about. And when I think about the difference between a job and a vocation, I think about, job being something you're good at and something that you can get paid for. And I think about a vocation and a mission as something that the world needs, that you love. And really, when I was trying to decide how I was going to spend my time, the Vanguard became one of those things, not a money-making venture. Every dollar that we make gets reinvested right into that community. It is Vanguard was born out of that necessity of needing a safe space for leaders and innovators that are looking to make an impact, to grow, and to communicate, and to build capacity with our defense industrial base to have that spot. So the Vanguard.
And what I've noticed is it's a pretty selective process. It's this is not a free for all. It's not for everyone, and so there is some vetting that initiates go through. So
sure.
Yeah. But Mark, man, it's a pleasure as always. Thanks for swinging by today. Thanks for entertaining my conspiracy theorist enthusiasm. I just love it. I love the weirdest topics in the world. And I believe most of them because it's just a funner world to believe some of that stuff. But anyway, I think we've kind of looked around and noticed that what was yesterday's conspiracy theory is today's proven conspiracy. And in more ways than, or 9 times out of 10 anyway, with some of this stuff. But anyway, that's the fun side of the Blue Sky program. Mark Holden of the Vanguard, Defense by Holden. And what was this? What's this future e-com site again?
Yeah, holdensends.com coming to near you. Launching, soft launch has already occurred, but we're doing a full launch end of April, beginning of May. So we're prepped for soft week. Thank you.
Beautiful. Happy to be a little buzz agent for you there. So let me know how I can help. Appreciate it as always, and we'll see you next time.
See you, man.